d'Ivoire is also known as the Ivory Coast. And fun fact, if you want to see a pygmy hippopotamus, then the Ivory Coast is the place to go. Though some know the Ivory Coast for its pygmy hippopotami, it's truly known for its cocoa. Over 1/3 of the world's cocoa is made in the Ivory Coast. And let's get this straight. 1/3 of anything is a lot. Like raccoons. Having 1/3 of the world's raccoons in one place, it's a freaking lot of raccoons.
Then the Europeans arrived, and in the scramble to claim territories, France claimed the Ivory Coast in 1893. The Ivorians often revolted against the French rulers, who imposed taxes, forced labor, and drafted them under the French military in both world wars. So not good times. This changed in 1961, when the Ivory Coast gained independence from France, and in a one-party election. By the way, who would have an election with only one party? The first president was elected, and what you need to know about him is he kept the Ivory Coast in a stable state from the 60s to the 90s. The Ivory Coast kept a strong relationship with France, and the French were the ones who taught Africans to grow cocoa. For this, coffee was the main export. Then he died, and with a boycotted election following afterwards, the first coup was held in 1999. This broke out into a civil war in 2002, and a second civil war in 2010.
Hey kids! The Ivory Coast is located in West Africa. It shares borders with Liberia, Guinea, I messed it up, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and the Atlantic Ocean. The Ivory Coast is mainly a forested plateau which morphs into the grasslands and savannas, but also has a mountain range along the border with Guinea? New Guinea. Okay, I almost got it. There are 3 different seasons throughout the year: hot and dry, warm and dry, and hot and wet. Due to the humidity of the climate, cash crops such as coffee and, more importantly, cocoa, are grown there. Using almost 9% of the total land of the coast is farming soil. The natural ability for cocoa to grow into the country is what makes the country the #1 producer of cocoa in the world, creating an influx of money that sadly does not come back to the workers. Because of the nature of the coast geography, its resources and physical features have allowed it to produce funds, but more so those who colonized it. If the resources had been elsewhere, merchants and traders might not have established the same kind of interest, and the country might have turned out differently amongst the people. Its physical features allowed it to produce cash crops efficiently, so if the physical features could have changed at all, then there would have been no interest within its crop production nor its resources, leaving it an altered country.
The problem with cocoa. Oh boy. The Ivory Coast has always relied on exports, first with coffee, and then with cocoa. Now, the Ivory Coast isn't some sort of glorious chocolate land. No. The country has many political tensions. The Ivory Coast is divided between the north and the south, with the north primarily made of migrant Christians and the south primarily having Muslims. And their nationalistic conflict is what led up to the first civil war. With a divided nation and mainly small communities, the country isn't unified. And another factor is the Ivory Coast's major reliance on cocoa. The cocoa itself, it's an unstable export, with prices fluctuating because of demand, climate, and just other reasons in general. So, the Ivory Coast can't just stop child labor by stopping cocoa farms. Besides, where would we get our sweet, savory, most likely slave-made chocolate from? Children are separated from their families and left with both emotional and physical scars. Those who are trafficked to the Ivory Coast believe that they'll be able to help their family and just get money. They are wrong. Take, for instance, Ali Diabet, who, at the age of 11, was taken by a slave trader from Mali to work on a cocoa farm. The slave trader had promised him that he would receive a bike and money for his family. He was also wrong. He was beaten the most because the bags of cocoa that he had to carry were taller than him. And at night, he and 18 other boys were locked into a room that measured 24 by 20 feet, and that only had one small hole for air. And although he and the other boys were freed by the police, he is left with scars and nightmares. And similar stories are happening all across the Ivory Coast and West Africa today. Those who are trafficked may never see their family again, destroying bonds and hurting families. And this is also not the farmer's fault. Well, okay, the beating part is the farmer's fault, but that's beside the point. Get out. Farmers need cheap labor since they can't afford anything else. Like, seriously though, right here in my hand, I am holding up a farmer's daily income. That's wrong. And this is not a new problem. No, this has been happening for years because little is being done. Chocolate companies such as Hershey's have stated that they believe child labor is wrong and that they will not allow it in their cocoa production. And I mean, like, well, thank you, Hershey's. Thank you for your opinion, because it means absolutely nothing. Now, don't get me wrong. Things have been done to stop some child labor. The Ivory Coast has set up laws that for working with hazardous material to the minimum age of 18, and other programs and agencies have abolished, quote, the worst forms of child labor. I mean, and get this. Chocolate companies have the money to pay a farmer a fair wage. So, why aren't they? And why isn't anything happening? Well, because the Ivory Coast is primarily made of small communities, transporting resources to each is difficult. And understanding the customs of each place would take months, even years. And that's another thing. Customs play a major role in this problem. Many families can't afford education, so children pass the time by working or making money. Farmers of cocoa sectors use this reason to justify their use of child labor. They're just working. What better can they do? So when we're looking for a solution, we have to bear in mind that trafficked children came because of an unaffordable education. Farmers' little income is why they use child labor, and that chocolate companies are doing little to nothing. And we also have to bear in mind that this will not take a year or two. This will probably take a decade or more. So, how do we solve this problem? Well, where's my candy? Ugh, Tootsie Roll. Who likes Tootsie Rolls? Ew.
We here at the Ivory Coast know about the issues at our chocolate plantations. We are concerned that 1.8 million children ages 5 to 17 are working on cocoa farms, and an estimate of 35,000 are trafficked within the Ivory Coast. 40% of child laborers in the Ivory Coast are not able to receive an education. The Chocolate Manufacturers Association is aware that child labor is being used. Chocolate companies such as Nestle and Hershey are also aware and state that they're collaborating with other companies to stop child labor. Other organizations such as Convention of the Rights of the Child, the International Labor Organization, the World Trade Organization, and the Ivory Coast had been eliminated the worst of child labor. Child labor causes both mental and physical scars on children and leave them uneducated and in continued poverty. Farmers also receive below poverty income, forcing them to use child as cheap labor. Our list of possible solutions are as follows. We would have the Ivory Coast impose a tariff on cocoa exports, use the tax money to set up multiple programs, including building schools, medical centers, and better living environments within the small communities. We would restate and enforce national labor laws that set hazardous work at the minimum age of 18 and age 12 for light minimum work. Also, encourage children to legally stay in school until the age of 16. Ask the general public through social media and other campaigns, for example, Coney 2012, to pressure both chocolate companies to pay farmers a fair wage and pressure their nation to offer support and aid in West Africa. Nations work with the International Labor Organization to reinstitute the Harkin-Engel Protocol, abolishing the worst forms of labor and forced labor. The Ivory Coast and other nations also work with the countries in West Africa, particularly Mali, Burkina
and Burkina Faso to set up laws against human trafficking. We are going to establish multiple schools in larger communities throughout West Africa, eliminating the majority of human trafficking. We are going to increase border security along Ivory Coast border and inspect vehicles and people coming in. We will remain active in working with chocolate manufacturers to produce fair trade cocoa without the use of